Okay, Jake. Well, I was going to shift us to Q&A. So, and I know Jake is here somewhere in the audience. Jake Brewer, you want to push us on that question? Where are you? Yeah. Okay. Connect it back to campaign finance. The issue is, as I understand it, why we have to be concerned of this issue of identity is if anonymous actors have greater ability to do damage online. And so if we're worried about the stealth side of politics, the stealth side of campaign finance, do we require disclosure, right? Jake, you're with me at the Sunlight Foundation. Transparency and disclosure is our mantra, but if the internet makes it easier for people who really want to hide, that's why the identity layer is important. Does that help?
It does. I just wanted to make sure it was said.
Oh, okay.
In the context of, I think,
okay. I don't know what the previous comments were
as well.
But I mean, there's also a problem with transparency, and I don't know what we do about it. But I am not crazy about what happened in California with with harassment of contributors to the Yes on 8 campaign. Especially when it comes to the workplace. The idea that, if someone gives $150 to a political campaign, no matter how loathsome and wretched that campaign is that happened to receive a majority support in California, that they're going to end up being, harassed at work, pressured to fire, boycotted, that's a problem. And it's a level of transparency that the internet has enabled that causes bad. Before, if you had just given, $100, $200 to a campaign, yes, it exists on some book at the Secretary of State's office, but nobody's going to read it and nobody's going to do anything with the information. Now, there are maps out there. I want to see who in my zip code has contributed to this campaign. Boom, it's there. Here's their houses.
But isn't the solution to that not to make it harder to access that information, but to make it harder to harass people? I mean, it's one thing to, say, I really disagree with you about, you're supporting that campaign. It's another thing to say, I'm going to fire you, or I'm going, I mean, shouldn't the burden be there on the harassers for crossing a line as opposed to us knowing who's trying to influence?
It's free speech. I mean, boycotts are a form of free speech. They're a respected form of free speech.
Then this is part of life.
And there's only going to be more transparency, because the next step for sites like 8maps is to tie in, the address and the phone number information that you can get easily through sites like Zabba Search, and say, these are the 10 contributors to this bad cause who live closest to you. Here are their phone numbers. Here's a script to use to call them.
What's your solution?
I think we should think seriously. I think this is a legislative issue, not a constitutional issue, about maybe raising the disclosure threshold a bit in terms of what's publicly reported, not what's reported to election commissions, but in terms of what is available to the public. I don't know that it's useful to the public if you've only given $100 to a campaign. I think that it could well be a higher...
Well, the threshold for federal campaigns is 200.
Is 200.
California's got a lower threreshold, I guess.
California's got a lower. It might be 500. I mean, it's an empirical question that requires some research.
I think it's sloppy thinking. I think in the context of campaigns, when you're giving money to a candidate, I understand why we thought it was necessary to be transparent about who's giving money to a candidate, because we're trying to at least use transparency to dampen quid pro quo behavior. I think it's a failed strategy, but that's why we did it. I don't see why it transfers over so directly into the context of things like initiatives. I just don't think it's the same issue. I mean, because the initiative, the campaign is about creating the wrong relationship with the representative. An initiative is just a position about a particular issue. And I would agree with you. I'm not moved by the public interest in understanding who gave what to these initiatives as much as I am moved to try to avoid the quid pro quo that exists in the context of politics.
But given how much corporations spend on initiatives, isn't it important to know who's spending most of the money on those?
Well, maybe that gets us into the line that Adam wants to draw about what's higher. But if you're really worried about, I just can't get animated about the disproportionate stuff. So, but, you know, other people are. If you're really worried about that, then let's talk about a very serious number. But, you know, even $500 doesn't strike me as a serious number in this
No,
case.
I think you're right about drawing a line between, you know, candidate spending and cause spending, because, you know, in candidates we're concerned about what that money can buy. You know, that there's a person out there who's going to be motivated by that money, who's going to do different things than they might have if they didn't have that money from you. And it's not the same with the ballot position, yes or no. I mean,
well, it's interesting. I disagree. I mean, I think that we ought to have more transparency of who is financing campaigns or initiatives. I think, you know, when you spend money in politics, it's an expansive form of speech, and you should know that it comes with, you know, there's some reciprocal expectation here that people can know who you are and what you're doing. Why is that conclusion? Why does that need to be hidden?
That's the conclusion. Why?
Well, no, I mean, you both seem to be arguing that we should raise the threshold of reporting, and I guess I'm pushing back on that. I think we should lower the threshold. Okay, we only have about 10 minutes left. I know there are lots of questions here, so I want to turn to the audience and get some audience participation. Yeah. Go ahead, say who you are and, yeah.
Paul Ryan with the Campaign Legal Center. I have a question for Professor Lessig. I want to probe into this notion of deregulating the campaign finance arena in the context of publicly financed elections, because I think there's a real tension there. First, because participation in those programs will necessarily be voluntary, at least in the manner in which our Constitution has presently been interpreted. In that context, some candidates will not be in the system. If they are deregulated, I'm wondering whether that will decrease the incentive to opt into the system for other candidates. And even secondarily, for those candidates who opt into the system, even if they choose to in an otherwise deregulated environment, every public financing program that has been envisioned to date, to my knowledge, has involved some pretty significant restrictions. So are you talking about deregulating even the rules that would apply to those who participate in? And if you deregulate those outside the system, how does that impact the incentive to get into the system?
Yeah, no, so I agree that the structure of regulation we've got right now is necessary so long as someone's inside of a privately funded campaign system. So if we have the opt-in system of the Durbin-Specter bill, then people who don't opt in, I think, still need to be under exactly the same, maybe even better reporting requirements, more efficient reporting requirements than we've got right now. For people inside the system, again, I think the regulations have to be narrowly tailored to the interest, and the interest is in maintaining the publicly funded system according to the contours of the system. So there is some regulation. Deregulation, to argue for deregulation is not to argue for no regulation, it's to argue for a presumption against the kind of regulation that systematically biases in favor of larger, more established, and against smaller, more grassroots-like organizations.